Welcome to the Checkpoint webinar with Forrester. Today's webinar is about protecting endpoint devices with advanced threat prevention. Joining us on this webinar is Forrester's senior analyst, Mr. Sherman. Chris, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Tal. And thank you for to everyone on the line for joining us today.
Also on the line, Mr. Yossi Chasson from Checkpoint, who is our Endpoint Security Product Manager. So take it away.
Great. Yeah, so, I'm Chris Sherman here. I'm a senior analyst at Forrester. I've been working for almost 8 years now covering the endpoint security industry. At Forrester, and during this time, my role has really been primarily focused on helping clients make, more strategic decisions around endpoint security and specifically their endpoint security stack. Organizations frequently come to us lamenting that their endpoints are, getting targeted more and more than ever. And Forrester data, shows that where servers were once used to be the most frequently targeted asset type in the enterprise. Now users, now admin complain that user endpoints such as employee-owned devices, corporate-owned devices, and mobile devices together make up a bulk of the assets that are most often targeted, in the enterprise. In fact, around 80% just 5 years ago focused on servers, and today only half involve a server, and most of the attacks now target an employee endpoint. Also, mobile is definitely on the lower end in terms of incidents, but it's steadily been increasing over the years, and now almost 1 in 5 external breaches involve a smartphone or a tablet. And specific threats are attracting more attention to endpoint security stacks than ever. Where mobile malware and traditional malware still cause concern, the more pressing concern for our clients is the fact that, many broad attacks that once used, only file-based malware, now look more like target attacks, in their use of fileless malware, user exploitation, credential theft, etc. Overall, we see, over half of the attacks, whether they're targeted or broad, leveraging fileless attack techniques. Living off the land using trusted applications like PowerShell and WMI to accomplish their goals. Of course, targeted attacks, though, are still a major concern, especially as its incidence is increasing. But other threats, such as ransomware and network attacks that are, maybe more broad, can easily lead to data loss or expensive remediation cycles. And unfortunately, it's not very straightforward when, trying to choose, the right tool. And organizations really struggle to, to layer the right controls on their endpoints. And the number of options are increasing. I've listed the top endpoint security technology buckets that we track in our annual security survey of around 3,000 buyers. You see here, you have traditional blacklisting-based AV, endpoint detection and response, or what we call endpoint visibility and control, app whitelisting, execution isolation, privilege management, right, within the app control bucket. These are just on the traditional endpoint side, right? And then it gets even more complex when you try to bring in mobile device coverage, into the purchasing decision. As commodity malware around the world gets more advanced, and more companies are looking beyond just basic anti-malware and looking to their endpoint security vendor to protect them against, both the basic file-based malware as well as more advanced hacking-style attacks. Many organizations that I speak with don't feel that they're adequately protected against any adversary that goes beyond the known malware on the endpoint. And this is where some of the behavioral protection measures come into play. But choosing the right solution is increasingly difficult, as the number of options increases. But this has unfortunately led to companies dealing with a high number of endpoint security tools and ultimately, for many companies, agent fatigue. According to our research, a survey that we conducted last summer, The average enterprise security team has to deal with over 6 endpoint security agents. And when you're talking about larger enterprises with more than 10,000 employees, this number actually doubles to over 12. To keep up with these threats, organizations have invested in many different point products, but this has led to inefficiencies and a lot of internal friction, especially when trying to build detection into the mix. All too often, these tools are requiring very different skill sets to run, and there's usually overlap in terms of the attack vectors that are addressed. We like to quip here at Forrester that spending without performing due diligence supports an expense in-depth strategy. Too many organizations spend based on the latest threat or RSA conference buzzword, but you really need to avoid that knee-jerk spending, because all too often this leads to more internal friction, especially when you don't have the internal resources to actually run these tools effectively. And complicating matters is the fact that buyers essentially have endpoint security options that span 3 generations of tools. The traditional products, or last generation, worked well for static threats and focused on preventing, file-based malware. But, the performance really suffered when it came to anything that went beyond this. And, the visibility into the endpoint environments were really lacking beyond, any just simple alert notifications. Current generation technologies perform much better on zero-day malware protection, but still there are a number of products on the market that aren't well equipped for some of the more advanced types of attacks that are utilizing things like file-based malware, or fileless malware, script-based attacks. Still, it's a mixed bag when it comes to current generation vendors and what they offer in terms of visibility. Some go deep and will give you, rich forensics and context around the alerts, but and some will just give you still more basic prioritized alerts, right? But all too often companies just end up drowning in these alerts or don't have the actual resources to act on some of these this data. A lot of the current generation tools also really process-based, and their behavioral detection really don't really look too much at like user behavior or do any type of baselining. But this is actually brings me to like more of the next generation tools, right? A lot of the downfalls, or a lot of the complaints that I get around current solutions today, is that they're not really well integrated. That it requires maybe multiple integration points or custom development to get, maybe to utilize APIs and stitch together some of these products, right? To me, a next generation suite, and we'll talk more about this in the presentation today, really gives you that full orchestration and automation between your prevention, detection, and response layers, and we'll talk about this quite a bit today. And there are a number of other issues too. I would say, in general, next generation tools do perform a lot better on fileless malware and do a better job at detecting more advanced style attacks without increasing the operational friction of the practice. So essentially, your endpoint security suite is meant to be your first line of defense, right? It's not, if you need more advanced detection tools, or if your SOC has more advanced requirements, you're going to layer on either an EDR or forensics tool, or maybe a managed detection and response service. But for your core endpoint security suite, it's meant to be as closed loop as possible, right? Because you really need to take action in as quickly as possible, especially when you're considering things like ransomware and some of the more coordinated multi-stage attacks that utilize network vectors as well as endpoint. So how do companies address this organizational gap, right? Some are going to ultimately rip and replace older solutions in favor of newer generation technologies. But oftentimes we'll see companies or buyers augmenting their traditional tools with new point products. ultimately, organizations have to refocus their endpoint security strategies to deal with these modern threats. So now let's shift a bit and talk about building a strategy through a layered approach, one which addresses those current threats that we just talked about, while maintaining or limiting any of just utilizing your existing skill sets and minimizing that operational friction. That's really your end goal here. You want to increase your efficacy without increasing friction. All right. At a minimum, your endpoint strategy has to start with prevention, right? This is, at this point, you really want to make sure that your endpoint environment has as limited of an attack surface as possible. Prevention really eliminates vulnerabilities and noise. Patching the most critical vulnerabilities can help lower the amount of time that you spend on detection and response. And you really want to prioritize your patches, based on the actual risk posed by the associated vulnerabilities. Some metrics that we've seen here for patch prioritization include, likelihood that a specific vulnerability will actually get exploited based on the existence of exploits in the wild, and your network controls that could potentially mitigate the damage or stop the exploit from actually occurring in the first place. And another metric that we'll talk about frequently is the sensitivity of the data that the vulnerable application touches, right? Because if the vulnerability once exploited actually doesn't expose any sensitive data, maybe you can reduce that criticality. Further, if you can prevent an action, such as stopping a known bad executable through blacklisting or maybe another approach, why not? But remember to go beyond file-based malware and look for solutions to prevent known bad behaviors as well. Ultimately, if you can use prevention technologies to eliminate 80% of the attacks against your organization, you can then shift your staff's time on the attackers, to the attackers that have the motivation and capability to do your company, the greatest amount of harm or damage. And there are a number of benefits to such an approach. Many of these prevention-focused tools don't require prior knowledge of the, of the threat, or the tools or techniques of the attacker, and as such, they offer superior zero-day malware and exploit protection. Prevention measures such as application execution isolation allow you to reduce your attack surface to a more manageable level and limit the number of applications that you need to deal with in your environment. You also want to create a scenario where ideally you have controls in place to prevent both the known and unknown malware and exploits, as well as preventing the known bad actions that potentially could be taken by an exploited process or a malicious executable, maybe a user. By implementing effective prevention technologies, you ideally reduce your overall exposure, and then ideally your detection tools will inform the prevention measures and catch what's left over. And after you have a foundation of prevention, it's time to build detection capabilities into your strategy. Unfortunately, though, too many organizations invest in detection-focused products that are either too manual in their approach, leading to internal friction and inefficiencies. But it's clear that today, you need to have a post-execution layer of protection, given the prevalence of, novel attack methods. And the bottom line is, detection may be your only option when dealing with some of the higher tier adversaries. And since many of the traditional endpoint security suites don't provide comprehensive, real comprehensive detection capabilities, it may be necessary to augment or replace with a more modern suite or point products. But it's important to note that it's no single product can give you complete breach detection. Right? This requires automation and coordination between your people, processes, and technologies used to detect attacks and prevent the breaches. It's really the aggregate of all of this that makes up your detection and response system. And there are a number of network-level detection tools, such as forensics or EDR, but network visibility and analysis, right? But one of the most effective categories of endpoint threat detection, specific to the endpoint, it's called what we call endpoint visibility control, or EDR, endpoint detection and response. Ultimately, you're going to need detection, that's fast, right? You need detection that offers as much prioritization and orchestration between the detection and remediation actions that need to be taken, right? It's easy to reimage, but that definitely gives you peace of mind, but it definitely takes a lot of effort and a lot of operational overhead to always reimage. So the companies a lot of the vendors are offering more tactical remediation measures built into their endpoint security suites. There are a number of, but ultimately you want your false positive rate of the solution to be as low as possible, because this is really going to determine the success of the automation conducted. Also, deciding on that appropriate tactical response is often going to be left to your team, but I'm increasingly seeing vendors automate this as well. Either suggesting remediation actions or automatically taking them from the get-go. Other examples of automated response could be using like a NAC to kill the switch port connected to an infected host, or maybe removing a malicious PE file from your environment. But ideally these actions will be as automated as reasonably possible. If every detected event requires manual admin involvement, your time to containment will go up, and you're going to drown in alerts and ultimately leave yourself exposed. And again, remember, speed is key here. So, once you have prevention and detection in place, you need to find the right balance between the two and coordinate your response and level of control through automation and orchestration. And this really is what separates the true suites from those point products that are just a handful of functions bundled together. And one of the focal points actually in my in Forrester's 2018 Endpoint Security Suites Wave. This is an evaluation where we ranked the top 15 products in the market. Over the past 6 months, we evaluated every solution against criteria that covers every major vendor's product feature set, strategy, and market presence. But those products which fared the best, including all the leaders, each have a strong balance of prevention and detection. That's kind of a common theme here. And I'll cover the results from the study shortly, but before I do, let's dive into some of the specific capabilities that differentiates those next generation suites from point products and older legacy tech. So for those of you that are choosing an endpoint security suite, this balance again is really key, because automation and the level of different tech, the level of orchestration can really make a big difference between trying to between stopping a threat before the attacker accomplishes their goals and ultimately leaves your organization on the wrong side of the news cycle. Ultimately, you need to have an endpoint security suite and supporting capabilities that integrates prevention, detection, response that ideally achieve a continual cycle where one feeds into the next. Specifically, your prevention capability should include exploit protection, patch management, some level of app control or isolation, such as application, like on-host sandboxing or whitelisting, and also data security, such as native encryption management. Right? These are all used to reduce that attack surface that I talked about and really limit the likelihood that an attacker will be able to get onto a system and execute a payload, a script, or an exploit. And this allows less time to be spent on the other stages of the cycle by limiting the noise seen by detection technologies and the time spent on remediation. And what does, however, get past the prevention focus controls should ideally be inspected and caught by your detection layer within the suite. These are capabilities. These include capabilities like endpoint visibility and runtime behavioral detection. There are many solutions on the market today, but some either don't go deep enough into endpoint behavior, or they collect too much information. That's just leads to maybe agent or alert fatigue. And in our wave evaluation, we looked for automated capabilities to fit here, such as behavior-based machine learning and correlation of user and process-based analysis. Ultimately, your detection capabilities can give you an overall purview of what's going on in the endpoint, as well as outside through integration with other tools in the stack. And finally, remediation or control has to be closely tied to the prior two in order to reduce the overall friction experience when trying to bring together multiple security functions under one practice. In the end, you want to have an endpoint security strategy that leverages capabilities in each of these buckets, with intel, policy, and remediation automation driving the connections. And this is exactly how we organize our criteria in the wave. And this ultimately led us to identifying 15 vendors out of around 50 that went through the pre-qualifying process. So the 15 that we evaluated really should be viewed as the top 15 suites, right? You can see them here in the final wave graphic published about 2 weeks ago. Each of these 15 are true suites with some level of automated, prevention, detection, and response. We really tried to exclude point products or any niche players that focus on maybe augmenting a endpoint security stack. We also required all vendors to have a demonstrable enterprise presence, right? Proven through having at least 100 enterprise customers with at least one deployment of 100,000 nodes or more. We really set the bar high in this evaluation. And the 7 vendors designated as leaders each do so in a highly automated fashion with high customer satisfaction and efficacy. And our criteria really prioritize the capabilities that I've discussed in the prior slides, as well as suitability in a variety of large enterprise environments. And as you can see from the weightings within the functional section, or what we call the current offerings here, threat prevention technologies and product performance are the most critical, but other areas such as detection, control, data security, mobile security, these are all important in the overall standings. Vendors with the most automation and customer validated efficacy did the best overall, with each of the 7 leaders demonstrating a broad range of ancillary suite technologies. For any of you that like a copy of this report, I believe there'll be a follow-up afterwards that will provide you with a link. If anyone doesn't get it, you can email me and I'll send you a copy. But I also want to note here that our weightings are meant to be a starting point and actually can be customized by the reader to reflect any specific requirements or organizational priorities. Ultimately, after speaking with well over 60 enterprise buyers as part of this research, we determined that in order to be successful, a vendor solution at a high level must be functional, efficient, and trustworthy. From a functional point of view, you need to be able to block those global scale attacks, that are using similar techniques seen to those previously seen in targeted attacks, for instance. Suites also have to be efficient. They need to decrease your endpoint complexity. The complexity is one of the top challenges identified by our that security teams will complain about, right? And identified by our survey. We actually survey all those 3,000 or so endpoint security buyers that participate in our annual survey. Will basically almost consistently year over year rate complexity as their top challenge when trying to practice security. Ultimately, buyers want an endpoint security suite that consolidates capabilities and really minimize that operational complexity as much as possible. And finally, vendors need to have strategies that inspire confidence. And this is especially important today as vendors struggle to retain customer trust, in some cases, lost due to like ineffective prior versions of their products, or maybe in an extreme example, a potential government involvement in the vendor's operations. So to finish things off, before I hand it over to Yossi, I have 4 recommendations that basically sum up the advice from my slides here. First, you want to reduce your attack surface through a balance of prevention, detection, and response, or remediation proficiency. pay attention to the user experience impact with any new endpoint security solution. Avoid point products that lack integration with enterprise identity management, for instance. When choosing any security technology for an employee device, really, you don't want to underestimate the importance of preserving endpoint performance and user experience. I've evaluated vendors that give me demos of products that look great, but once actually deployed on your average endpoint with, maybe 6 or 8 gigs of RAM and an i5, you're just not going to, the performance can suffer, right? If you require state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line hardware to get good performance, it's probably not going to work for most companies. And finally, just with the increasing importance of, covering mobile, look to vendors who at least have a common policy engine covering both traditional and mobile endpoints, to help reduce the overall friction. All right, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Yossi. Yossi?
Thank you, Chris, for this fascinating overview of the endpoint area and industry today. Before we continue, I actually have a question for you. How important do you think is it for customers today to choose a fully featured endpoint security solution versus multiple point products?
Yeah, considering the lack of security talent available for manual processes, within the average enterprise, you really need a suite which, either offers built-in automation and orchestration, or native integrations with maybe a SOAR vendor, to protect and respond to attacks in a timely manner. In the past, having multiple point products was preferable to enterprises compared to integrated suites. In fact, we track this preference, for one versus the other in our annual security survey. And up to a few years ago, suites were considered less effective, and only 39% of organizations reported preferring a suite over multiple best-of-breed point products. But today, that has essentially flipped. In the latest survey, we found that 65% now prefer suites. And each year, this is increasing. Now, ultimately, you need to be able to keep up with the pace of attacks. And to do so, you really either need to have native integration between the point products or a suite approach. Yossi, do you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree, and thanks for that information.
Yeah, I'd also mentioned, I want to point out some vendors, offer protection that go beyond the endpoint, right? Such as like network security and cloud offerings to help further reduce that friction between your endpoint team and the rest of the security organization.
Yes, and actually that's one of the strategies that Check Point is taking, and we'll cover that in my section. So, my name is Yossi Hassan. I'm a product manager in Check Point covering endpoint security. I worked with Chris very closely during the last 6 months on the process of evaluating our products. And I want to talk to you today about how you can prevent the 5th generation of cyber attacks with solutions like SandBlast for endpoint and mobile security. So when we look at the current generation of attacks, we call them the 5th generation of cyber attacks, we see a few different characteristics of those attacks. They are large scale, they are across country and industry. They use state-sponsored technologies and very advanced threat technologies. They have devastating damages, and they are multi-surface. And one of the, or actually a few of the examples for those kinds of attacks in the last year were the famous ransomware attacks such as WannaCry, NotPetya, and BadRabbit. All of those were actually attacking multiple kinds of attack vectors and flowing through different kinds of surfaces. So when we talk about Check Point's architecture for security, we talk about the Infinity architecture. The Infinity architecture covers multiple attack surfaces and vectors: network, cloud, mobile, and endpoint. And we actually provide shared threat intelligence between the different vectors, and we consolidate security management between all of them. But let's talk specifically about SandBlast Mobile and SandBlast Agent that provides security for the mobile and endpoint devices. So as Chris already mentioned, we ran with them a long evaluation process for those products, and we are very excited to say that we got to be in the leader area in Forrester's wave diagram. Not just in the leader, we're actually pretty high in the leaders area with a very strong current offering and even stronger strategy. We actually scored the highest possible scores in our corporate vision and focus criteria for the endpoint. We got high scores around malware prevention, actually the highest score. We also reached the high scores in data security and mobile security, which shows that our solution is really fully featured and have multiple capabilities other than in addition to just advanced threat prevention. We got the highest score for external integration, which is very important when you work with multiple vendors in your security deployments. And as a company, also Check Point got a very high evaluation in terms of product support and security community involvement, which is also very important to customers. And actually one of the quotes that I like the most in the report is what you see in the bottom there. For customers looking for a solid combination of new technology and traditional suite capabilities in a single console, Check Point should easily make the shortlist. So the products that were actually evaluated are both SandBlast Agent and SandBlast Mobile. They're all part of a unified architecture of advanced threat prevention, securing both endpoints and mobile. And let's look actually at the components or different capabilities of those two products. So they have actually 5 different layers. The first layer is the data security layer. The second one is the access control and secure communication. The third one, and actually the biggest one, is the advanced threat prevention capabilities. And we'll go over the details of each of those layers in a second. The fourth is the endpoint detection and response capability. And the last one, and not the least, of course, is the mobile security. So first of all, as you see here, that's a real fully featured suite covering multiple needs and requirements that our customers have. If you talk about the data security, the solution provides full disencryption capabilities and external media encryption, as well as document security, so document encryption and document access control. In addition, we provide port protection capabilities to secure all of the peripheral ports on the endpoint and make sure they are not used if customers don't want them to use, or they're used in a very specific way. If we look at the access control and secure communication layer, then we have things like endpoint firewall and endpoint IPsec VPN and SSL VPN for encrypted remote access. But we also have application control to control which applications are whitelisted or blacklisted in the organization, which applications can be executed and communicate. And we have also endpoint compliance capabilities, which helps our customers check the compliancy of the different endpoints to their policy. And even if they find out some uncompliant devices, they can remediate them right away using some remotely executed scripts and other measures. But let's look at the advanced threat prevention, the most important part of this suite. So we start with baseline prevention, which we call anti-malware. So that's the capability that uses signatures and the heuristics to protect mainly against the known threats. The known threats are a large part of threats, but the more interesting threats are the unknown and zero-day threats. And the advanced prevention capabilities, the 2 layers above, are the capabilities that helps us prevent against the unknown and zero-day threats. We split into 2 kinds of preventions, the online protections and offline protections. Online protections means a protection that needs to consult with some kind of a cloud service or an on-premise service. Offline protections are protections that are running on the endpoint itself, mainly behavioral based. They do not need updates or connectivity, and they run offline even if they're not connected to the network. In the online protections, the two main or two core modules are threat emulation and threat extraction. There are an NSS recommended capabilities, and we'll look at the details of them later on. They give us mainly the sandboxing capabilities that helps detect zero-day and even the most invasive kind of threats. Threat extraction is a bit of a paradigm change in the security world, that it actually doesn't inspect the threats, but it just extracts any potentially malicious threat found in the document and provides very quickly a risk-free document. Antibot looks for traffic going out from the endpoint to malicious command and control servers, detects the traffic, blocks it, and remediates the infection. URL filtering helps admins decide which URL categories their users should be able to browse to and which are blocked. When we talk about the offline protections, the first one is the anti-ransomware protection, a very efficient protection that looks for ransomware behavior and is able not only to block the ransomware itself, but can also remediate it completely, including restoring any files that were encrypted during the process. We'll talk about how do we do it in a minute. Zero phishing is a very unique ability that helps block any phishing attacks or web phishing attempts while the user is browsing to the phishing website. Anti-exploit helps actually identify exploitation attempts of legitimate applications on the endpoint and block those attempts. Behavioral Guard is our newest behavioral inspection engine that can actually look on any kind of behavior on the endpoint and very quickly understand if it's malware or not, if it's part of a known family or an unknown family, and it can even protect against fileless attacks and malicious scripts. In the layer of the EDR, endpoint detection and response, we start with forensics collection, and that gives us the ability to create automatic incident analysis reports. We'll see an example of that very soon. And more importantly, actually, we can also provide full attack chain remediation for any attack. And when I'm saying full attack chain remediation, I'm emphasizing the full. So when you're not remediating just the last symptom of the attack, we're remediating all of the attack from the moment it got to the endpoint through all of the different actions that it did. Another thing in EDR is the automated machine quarantine capability, so it's very important to contain the attack as quickly as possible, and we have the ability to automate, to quarantine machines and make sure any attacks are not spreading laterally. In the mobile security part, there are actually four main capabilities. The first one is malicious application prevention. So we're able to detect malicious applications as we are running them on a sandbox environment and check if they're doing anything that they shouldn't do. We have a very mobile-specific anti-phishing solution. Then we have also network attack protection that looks for man-in-the-middle attacks, Bluetooth-based attacks, and SS7 attacks. And the last capability is the jailbreak and root detection that helps organizations understand if the mobiles that are connected to the environment are jailbreaked or rooted, which pose great security risk to the organization. So as we said, the core modules, the two core modules in this solution are threat emulation and threat extraction. Threat emulation is a very advanced evasion-resistant sandbox that uses many different machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities, as well as what we call CPU-level inspection to detect any unknown malware and zero-day threats. And it works together with the threat extraction capability that does actually content sanitization. It immediately delivers to users risk-free documents, and it improves both the level of security and the level of user experience. Those two capabilities helped us get the highest score in the NSS BPS report, Breach Prevention System report. It happened late last year. We got the highest score, 100% breach prevention score with 0 false positives. Let's go back to the features of the endpoint itself. So as Chris said, and we are actually agree with that very much, runtime behavioral analysis and forensics is key. So we actually record or collect forensics data from various OS sensors, from registry, from the network, from processes, and so on. Whenever we see an event happening, we actually we generate automatically an event forensics report. The detection event can happen not only from checkpoints capabilities, but also from third-party antivirus that the user might run in his network. Third, we use advanced algorithms to actually analyze the raw forensics data, and using that, we actually remediate the full attack chain, and we digest the incident report, the incident to a report that can be sent to Smart Event, our monitoring console that admins can use to research the event and the attack. How those reports look like. So they are very detailed, yet they are very easy to consume reports. That's how a forensics report looks like. It has a few different areas. The first one is the suspicious activity that tells the user or the admin if the attack is real, which event occurred. The next one is what was the business impact, which files were touched during the attack, which files were deleted, sent out, encrypted, and so on. How the attack was remediated, which actions were taken automatically by the solution to remediate the attack. And last but not least, of course, the attack flow. The graphical representation of the attack flow is provided to the admin. Anti-ransomware is a unique feature that actually builds on some of the forensics capabilities that I just showed you. So anti-ransomware, as I said, prevents the most evasive and zero-day ransomware variants. We are running tests in our labs every day with the newest kinds of ransomware samples, and the results are pretty amazing, actually. And most importantly, it safely recovers encrypted data if some files were encrypted during the detection process. So how it works? So basically it runs behavior analysis, it constantly monitors for ransomware behavior, it detects encryption, but most importantly it uses data snapshots whenever it sees suspicious modifications of files. When we detect a ransomware attack, we quarantine the ransomware, and we're able to do the data restoration, actually to restore the encrypted files, because we have snapshots of files that were taken before the ransomware event happened. Another engine that uses behavioral inspection capabilities is the behavioral guard engine. So that's a predictive malware detection and classification agent that uses the forensics to actually isolate a minimal common forensics execution tree that uniquely identifies mutations of malware families. And you can see an example over here in the forensics execution tree that is taken off Cerber. This engine also can detect unknown malware, completely unknown malware, based on generic behavioral rules that are constantly being developed here in Checkpoint. Last but not least, it also detects and blocks malicious scripts and fileless attacks. So malicious scripts like PowerShell on JavaScript and other fileless attacks. Let's say an example of Cerber, for example. Cerber is a common ransomware. Last year, it started around December 2016, and it had a few different mutations. We see here 4 different mutations, and what we see is that there is one thing that is very common to those 4 different mutations, and there were about 70 in the wild, that VT-ransom or Cerber.exe actually created another exe file called mshta.exe, and that is actually the minimal forensics tree that identifies that malware. Whenever we identify this behavior, we know it's a Cerber, no matter which mutation it goes with. Let's look at zero phishing. So zero phishing, as I said, a very unique capability that helps our customers to detect phishing websites and phishing attempts when they are being accessed by the users. So unlike solutions that are based on URL reputation, or they look on emails via anti-spam solution, this solution looks at the website when it is accessed and looks for signs that it is a phishing website. And there are, in this slide, a few of the indicators we are using, but there are many others. There are about 50 indicators that are used to block those phishing websites, even so those that were never seen before. It's important to emphasize that the advantage, the checkpoint advantage that we have behind all of those different engines, and we are talking about Threat Cloud. Threat Cloud is one of the biggest threat intelligence databases in the world. We have daily inputs for traffic across 150,000 security gateways worldwide, and the number of malicious file hashes, sites, etc. that we have is immense. This tool really helps us to streamline detections and to distribute signatures and information about threats to all of our customers, no matter where did we learn it for the first time. It's important to say that today customers can buy our endpoint security solutions in a few different ways. First, they can use SandBlast agent capability as an augmentation to any current baseline threat prevention solution that they have. They can also use the complete security SKU to actually buy a full endpoint security suite that includes access control, data protection, antivirus, and all of the SandBlast agent advanced threat prevention capabilities. And we just announced about a month ago another consumption method that we call SandBlast agent next generation antivirus that has actually all of the advanced threat prevention capabilities and the baseline threat prevention capabilities in a single SKU. So that is the product that you can use to replace your current endpoint antivirus solution, and if you want to stay with your access control and data protection solutions that you currently use. So let's summarize. So in summary, and the best way to summarize is actually to talk about our principles of endpoint security. And we have actually 7 main principles that we are keen on following when we add any endpoint security solution or any additional capability. The first one is prevention first. And Chris emphasized the importance of prevention in the endpoint security strategy. We don't want to settle on detection. We think that attacks can be prevented, even advanced attacks. We provide practical prevention to our customers. We provide high accuracy and with no compromises. We want to have minimal user experience hit and to make it self-catered. Next thing is technology versatility. So we are not using single prevention engine. We are using multiple different engine, and we use tools like machine learning to correlate verdicts of different engines. We focus on remediation. So we think that remediation is very important, and we provide full detection remediation. It's automated, it's orchestrated, and we believe it's very unique. We are keen on automated forensics analysis. It's very important to provide the admins clear and simplified forensics event reports. This will help them automate the incident response process and quickly triage threats. We provide complete endpoint security solutions, so a fully featured security solution with a very wide breadth and depth of the solution. It's modular, it's open, and it's extendable. And last but not least, it's an integral part of the Checkpoint Infinity strategy. So we share intelligence between network, cloud, endpoint, and mobile, and we provide collaborative protection across all the different vectors. So once again, before I finish my part, the diagram that we are very proud of. Checkpoint is really one of the leaders in this stack here. And in order to summarize, I'll just talk over a few of the quotes that Forrester told about us. They just summarize great our capabilities. So Checkpoint offers a fully featured traditional suite with modern updates. The product ships with multiple signatureless detection capabilities for malicious file behavior. So it's very important to have signatureless capabilities, and we have those. We provide tight integration to share policy and threat intelligence between the company's endpoint network and cloud offering. And Checkpoint should easily make the shortlist. So that's it from my side. Tal, back to you for the questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Yossi, and thank you very much, Chris. I hope the audience has found the session as intriguing and interesting as I did. I think the combination of describing the entire landscape that Chris gave us and some of the details of how this research, this very detailed and comprehensive research was done, and providing, of course, the checkpoint angle of how we do endpoint security. And I think important to note how Checkpoint has progressed along the years from that we came traditionally from the network security arena and progressed to other areas, to full areas of cloud, mobile, and of course endpoint, up to this point where Forrester named us as a leader in this area. So I think that's a very fascinating, circle to show. We have a few questions in the Q&A part. And I'll start with the first question that comes from someone that asks, do you use both pre-execution, static prevention, and behavioral or dynamic-based detection? So who's going to take this question or answer, actually? Perhaps Lior?
Yes, hi, this is Lior. Nice to have you. I'm the Director of Endpoint Security, Endpoint Cyber Security in Checkpoint. I will be happy to answer this one.
Okay.
Unlike some other companies, we believe that there is a lot of value in doing pre-execution detection, because then nothing run on your machine. You detect it before anything is running. But not everything can be identified like this. Some attacks you cannot identify them statically, and you have to actually detect them only based on the behavior when the attack runs. So we actually apply both methods, both static or pre-execution and post-execution, which is behavioral or a dynamic approach. More than this, we actually have multiple engines in each one of these stages. So we have engines that are looking on known attacks for pre-execution and post-execution, but we also have several machine learning technologies in both sides, both static and dynamic, that are identifying unknown attacks as well.
Okay, thank you, Lior. We have a question now, which I think goes for Chris. And this question is, what should I look for? This is a question from a client about what should I look for in an endpoint security for fileless malware protection. Maybe some highlights that Chris can give us about the focus on fileless malware protection.
Sure. So, to get fileless malware protection, you need to be able to intercept and inspect those scripts before they're executed, right? Behavioral protection, obviously, depending on the vendor, can supply this, but, it's a mixed bag depending on, the level of protection each vendor supplies. Even if, they have behavioral protection, they might not inspect, all the scripts. They may not have PowerShell or WI protection, for example. But, another indicator that I sometimes look for is, do they support anti-malware scanner interface, which is a Microsoft function that allows vendors to basically, use APIs to intercept those calls. And it's definitely a big differentiating factor, in the wave that we publish, and whether or not a vendor is, poised to protect against fileless malware. But yeah, the third-party tests, unfortunately, that a lot of the vendors participate in don't really go into fileless malware yet. So I think, going forward, we'll probably see more of that, more real-world tests coming out of that community.
And Tal, if I may add,
yes.
This is Lior again. So I want to tie you to the previous question of pre-execution and post-execution. So this is a great example for this. We are addressing the fileless attacks using pre-execution exactly through the same Microsoft API that Chris just mentioned. This AMSI API allows us to look at scripts even before they are executed, which enable us to do static analysis or pre-execution investigation of them. and see if there's malicious characteristics. But and if stuff are not identified there, then we are following scripts using the dynamic approach. So we look on every script engine to see what it's doing in real time. Even if we didn't catch it using pre-execution, we will hopefully catch any malicious activity by its behavior.
Okay. Our time is almost up. We are coming to the top of the hour, which is about now. The last question that we're being asked here is about ransomware. I think Yossi can take it. We have a question that says, you said that your anti-ransomware solution, this is for Yossi because he said it, is behavioral based. Does it mean that I will lose all files that were encrypted before the ransomware detection? Yossi, can you take this?
Sure. So one of the things that I mentioned during my talk was that we are running snapshots of any suspicious file modifications. I have some echo. Tal, maybe you can mute yourself or anyone else.
Yes. Good.
Thanks. Okay, now I think it's much better. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we are doing is that we are running snapshots of any files that are being modified in a suspicious manner, and that means that even if the detection of the ransomware happens only after some files were encrypted, we will be able to restore all of those files and get the machine back to the status that it was before the ransomware attack. So sometimes we're able to detect ransomwares before they start the encryption, but unfortunately sometimes ransomware are very, very sophisticated and their behavior does not actually tell that they are a ransomware until they actually start encrypting files. That is very easy to detect, the encryption process. But then if you don't have the snapshots ready beforehand, you will not be able to restore the file. So we do have those snapshots. We save them in a tamper-proof folder, which is not part of the Windows backup or shadow copy area, which means that the ransomware cannot delete those snapshots. So we will have the capability to restore them when needed. This capability was successful against many different kinds of attacks, both in our labs and within our customers' deployments. Thanks, Tal.
Thank you, Yossi. With this point, we are coming to the end of our session today. I would like to personally thank Chris from Forrester for attending and cooperating with us on this webinar. Thank you very much, Chris, for being with us.
Thank you.
Yossi, thank you also for this fascinating and detailed overview on endpoint security. And thank you all for joining us today in this webinar. We will be sharing the deck and the recording of this webinar in an email to follow. Thank you again for joining us, and please join us in upcoming next Checkpoint webinars. Thank you all.